The Watergate Scandal and Erosion of Trust in America by Angel Mead. The Watergate scandal was a major political event that happened in the United States in 1972. Five men in connection to Nixon's presidential re-election campaign broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters, attempting to plant wiretaps and steal campaign information. DNC headquarters was found May 26, 1849, in Washington, D.C. Police apprehended 5 men later, identified as Virgilio Gonzalez, Bernard Barker, James McCord, Eugenio Martinez, and Frank Sturgis. They were criminally charged with attempted burglary and attempted interception of the telephone and other communication, also known as wiretapping. On June 17, 1972, the night guard was making his normal rounds when he noticed an exit door suspiciously tapped open. They promptly alerted authorities. It was clear the state of things that the break-in was no ordinary burglary. The acting FBI Director L. Patrick Gray was notified of the incident, opened an investigation, and began arresting suspects. Among these arrested was the security officer for the committee to re-elect the president. The sitting president was recorded a few days later discussing investigation with his chief of staff, H.R. Bob Haldeman. In the record, Nixon approves a plan to utilize the CIA to thwart the FBI investigation. This recording came to be known as the smoking gun. During the conversation, Nixon and Haldeman also discussed the associate director of the FBI, Mark Felt, who they believed would be compliant in aiding the president. Years later, the public would learn that Felt was keeping reporters from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward, and Carl Bernstein, informed about the investigation under the code name Deep Throat. Woodward and Bernstein revealed that $25,000 check made out to Nixon campaign had been deposited to the bank account of one of the burglars. Threats were made to media outlets, including the Washington Post, regarding their reporting of the investigation, which they promptly reported as well. The media played a crucial role in exposing the Watergate scandal. The persistence led to many reforms and change in journalism ethos, evolving from subjective storytelling to more objective reporting. Reforms were put into place, making it easier to track political donations and spend following the $25,000 bank deposit. The public trust in government saw a sharp decrease and sharp increase in trust in the media. There was also a surge in investigation journalism. A graph published by the Pew Research Center showed the trust in the government following the Vietnam War in 1960 and the Watergate scandal of 1970s. The Watergate reforms, primarily implemented through the Federal Election Campaign Act (FECA) and its amendments, aimed to regulate political donations to limit the influence of money in politics and enhance transparency. Key reforms include limits of campaign contributions and spending, disclosure requirements for donors and campaign finances, the establishment of public financing for presidential campaigns. The Privacy Act of 1974. The Privacy Act of 1974 was also introduced following the exposure of the scandal. This law protects individuals against unwarranted invasions of privacy resulting from the collections, maintenance, use, and disclosure of personal information by federal agencies. Individuals had the right to request to receive copies of the records maintained by federal agencies. Individuals can request the inaccurate, irrelevant, or incomplete information in the records be corrected. The Act restricts how federal agencies can disclose personal information requiring consent. By the end of January 1973, as Nixon was preparing for his second term, the 5 individuals caught and 2 other individuals overseeing the burglary had already pleaded guilty or had been convicted. In a nationally televised address on April 30th, Nixon blamed his aides for keeping him in the dark about the scandal and telling the nation that Haldeman, among others, had resigned, which was untrue. He vowed to take charge of the investigation and quest to discover the truth, even though he had direct involvement. At the expense of being sacrificed to protect the president, several Watergate participants decided to tell all while Nixon continued to feign innocence. During the court hearings, a Nixon aide, Alexander Butterfield, revealed the installation of voice-activated taping system in the Oval Office. Both the Senate Watergate Committee and the appointed prosecutor requested the tape, which Nixon refused. On October 20th, 1973, in a show of executive power, Nixon ordered the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General to fire the appointed prosecutor, but both men refused and resigned in protest. The role of Attorney General then fell on Solicitor General Robert Bork, who reluctantly complied with Nixon's request and dismissed the prosecutor. Nixon's attack on his own Justice Department came with grave consequences. More than 50,000 concerned citizens sent telegrams to Washington, and 21 members of Congress introduced resolutions calling for Nixon's impeachment. In the face of overwhelming protests and public outrage, Nixon relented and appointed Leon Jaworski as his new Watergate prosecutor. Jaworski resumed the investigation and eventually secured the release of the Oval Office recordings in July 1974, when the Supreme Court ruled the tapes did not fall under executive privilege. Faced with the smoking gun of his involvement in Watergate, Nixon announced his resignation from the presidency on August 8, 1974. He was the first president to resign from office. The public's opinion of Nixon was firmly skewed due to the lies and deceit. The morning that his resignation took effect, the President with Mrs. Nixon and their family said farewell to the White House staff in the East Room. A helicopter carried them from the White House to Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. Nixon later wrote that he thought, as the helicopter moved on to Andrews, I found myself thinking not of the past, but of the future. What could I do now? At Andrews, him and his family boarded the Air Force plane to El Toro Marine Corps Station in California, and then were transported to his home, Costa Pacifica in San Clemente. In conclusion, although reforms were put into place to address the issues of government corruption and transparency, the public opinion of the government has further declined over the years. The last 3 sitting presidents' lowest approval rating did not exceed 40%. While trust in the government may have been fluctuated, has generally not returned to the high levels seen before Watergate. Despite reforms and the change in policy, Americans continue to express high levels of trust in the government. This distrust is often linked with concerns about corruption, the influence of money in the politics, and perceived disconnect between the governments of the public. This is some of the conspiracy theories that surround the Watergate. No one, including the burglars, had adequately explained why they were in the Watergate complex in June 1972. Jim Hogan's secret agenda argues that the White House plumbers were hunting for intel related to CIA and prostitution ring. Hogan also believes one of the burglars was secretly working for the CIA and sabotaged the break-ins to protest the agency. Watergate, the fun facts. Only in 2005 did the Washington Post reveal informant Deep Throat's real identity, Mark Felt. In 1977, Nixon claimed when the president does it, that means it's not legal. During the investigation, Nixon coined the term, "I'm not a crook," a remark still used to parody in comedy to this day.
That I welcome this kind of examination because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got. President?
Nixon tanked the stock value of Washington Post out of revenge. Nixon's Watergate interview is the highest rated political interview of all time. And here is my works cited page. And that concludes my PowerPoint.